are going live. Welcome everybody coming on to Zoom right now. Grateful to have you here. Also on Facebook Live. We are on Facebook Live at this time too for our, where are we? March. I lost track here. March faculty Q&A for the Residence Academy. Always great to be here with everybody. We always appreciate your presence in these sessions. We always welcome your great questions, and we always have a great time exploring these ideas together in our conversations with you and with the faculty. Today we have Mr. Adam Apollo here with us. We're always grateful when he's able to join us, and also Jamie Janover, who is, Jamie is like a mainstay of the Academy for so long now. I think everybody knows Jamie. And he's traveled the world sharing unified physics and the true nature of reality, which is to live life as if it's a festival, constantly in the play of creativity and joy and celebration. And Jamie, you carry that so well. So,
thanks, Marshall. Good to be
here. Yeah, good to be here with you guys. I expect to have Ines join us probably in an hour. I think our time zone shift here in the U.S. has not synced up with what she's expecting timing-wise, probably. So probably she'll be here soon. Maybe William Brown too. We're not sure. He's in the meeting with Nassim, and he said maybe if it gets done early, that he might be able to join us as well. But we got us guys here, and we got you guys here, and we're happy to be here with you. And again, for those who are maybe new to these sessions, this is a Q&A session. We do this every third Wednesday with the faculty and every first Wednesday of the month with Nassim. And there's a Q&A button down the bottom of your screen where you can post a question for us. A couple of you have already. And so go ahead and please open that up. And if you have a question you want to post, put it there. And then also, of course, the chat where you can say hi and let us know where you're coming in from today, as many of you are already. And and we can kind of dive into this whole thing and welcome everybody again on Facebook Live, whoever is out there. We always love your presence with us in this virtual space. So let's do a little round of check-ins and see what's happening for us. How about you, Adam? What's cooking in your world that you'd like to share today? I know last time you had that great what was it, Conscious Life or something? What was it?
Mm-hmm.
You had that
Conscious Expo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was super fun. I really had a blast giving that presentation. For those of you that want to watch it, you can still go to Conscious Life Expo's website. And you can actually kind of, on-demand rent views of all the different speakers and the talks that they did. And there's a bunch of great speakers there. James Redfield, one of my heroes, a bunch of other amazing just authors and speakers and just great minds. And I did a presentation that I call The Ancient Mystery of Our Human Origins. And it was a journey through to all of these different sacred sites that I've been to. And I focused a lot on the three places that I've been with this community, with the Residence Academy students, particularly Peru and Bolivia and Egypt. I talk about Mexico a little bit, but a little bit less because there's less like massive megalithic stone sort of proofs you can point right to and say, hey, look at this. This defies our understanding of the physics of what was possible at that time. This is highly advanced engineering. And so I take people on a tour through these different sites and show really the magnitude of the knowledge and science and mathematics and engineering and technology existent in these places, and then go forward to show all of these different sites and these different cultures around the world who very, very clearly directly point to having a relationship with extraterrestrial species. And then I show that basically there's obvious cross-pollination. I also show the Paracas skull. William sent me some data on that and some slides to use and be able to talk about the fact that that this skull from mummified remains found in Peru and autopsied by Nassim, in a dentist office in Lima, has certain genetic markers and properties that strongly suggest that it is a hybrid of a human and another species that's never been found on this planet. And I think that there's some really fascinating implications with that, and with the kind of greater story arc that I paint. What I'm really showing is that it may be that the idea of aliens out there are not really aliens at all. They're actually just other branches of our own family in genetics, and that we may be genetically connected to and related to a variety of species out there, and that there have been influences and cultures all over the world for many, many thousands of years. And this changes our whole perspective. And it doesn't say, hey, all the ETs have all this high tech and great stuff, and the little middly humans, we're slaves to them or doing little things. It's like, no, actually, there's a family relationship here. And we as humans, in our evolution and in our breeding and crossbreeding and development, created some absolutely fantastic, amazing technologies in the past. And we need to remember that. We need to remember who we are and reconnect to who we are right now, so that we really get the longer picture of our journey as a human species and are able to then make the right choices going forward. So anyway, I hope you guys check it out and enjoy it.
I want to check it out.
And
yeah,
at hopefully at some point I'll be able to get a copy and post it up there freely for people. But for right now, you can find it on the Conscious Life Expo site.
Awesome. I definitely want to check that out. You've totally piqued my interest. Adam, while we're just kind of in that stream, there's a question here from Regina it's put to William Brown, but it'd be great for you to speak to it, since you just tied into this topic here. It says in the Gaia show, Nassim mentioned that William Brown has identified a point in the human genome that shows evidence of intentional modification. Could he please elaborate? And if William comes on later, we can have him talk about it a little bit more. I know you're familiar with this, Adam, and how does this tie into exactly this consideration that you're proposing?
So there's a couple kind of technical areas to talk about around that. One of those is that, the skull that's being studied is an elongated skull, right? So we would think, okay, traditional science says, all right, so probably if the skull is stretched like this, it was either, wrapped with something to kind of force the skull to grow that way, or that this is some sort of mutation, right? But in the study of the DNA of this Paracas remains, basically there's what we call a non-random series of base pair changes. And there's such a high number of gene variants and base pair changes that it's obviously absolutely not a mutation. In other words, it's not a result of, a human baby mutated in some way due to some extraneous circumstance. There's massive amounts of DNA differences that actually point to this having nothing to do with mutation itself. And then also there's a large scale of changes to the protein coding regions of the DNA, which indicate a possible sister species, not human. And then the third piece is that looking at the X chromosome haplogroups and the Y chromosome haplogroups, which is, in other words, the maternal parentage of this individual, and the paternal, so the mother and the father, what the data and the results showed was that basically after looking at and trying to match the father's chromosome genetic line to over 30 million different sequence reads. Like they read 30 million sequence reads from the data, and there were no matches among any known paternal Y chromosome haplogroup on Earth. Now, that's really interesting. And it's possible, there is still a possibility, something like 30% probably, that like we literally just couldn't match it, and that there's something like 55 million or so sequence possibilities, and they were able to gather about 30 million from the DNA sample. So it's still possible that it was just not there, but all of the major Y chromosome haplogroup branches were absolutely eradicated, and so there's a very, very strong suggestion that the father, in this case of this individual, was not human.
Wow. So there's a profound analysis for evidence of an interspecies breeding going on.
Yeah.
And in regards to our human DNA and the idea that I think it was Francis Crick, wasn't it, who wrote the papers talking about the what's it called, the
panspermia.
Directed panspermia, exactly.
Yeah.
And how our own DNA shows evidence of having been modified. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I think that to get to Regina's question specifically, the one piece I didn't mention was that the differences between this being and standard humans, primarily those differences are due to what are called genetic insertions and deletions. So that's a specific class of variant types, and there's different amounts of those variant types in different parts of the body. But this strongly suggests that, yeah, there were adjustments to the genetic code, some kinds of insertions or deletions. Of course, that could still, by the way, be our human lens on what that looks like in the genetic code. And we call it insertions and deletions because of how we work with genetics. But that's, I think, really where William and William's conclusion was that this could be evidence of actual genetic modification as well, that there was actually insertions and deletions to the genetic code to maybe make whatever the zygote, the egg or whatever, more compatible between different types of species DNA coming together. There's a variety of ways that we can look at that if we dive into it deeper, but that's at high level. Yeah, it looks like there's either genetic modification and or a cross-species hybridization going on with this giant skull. And we see these giant skulls like this all over the world. And, that's massively there. And, in evidence in these kinds of things, there's definitely something that's not human, it seems. And then, but we don't really, I think, account for the idea that what we consider human is only just based on what we know about humans for the past few thousand years. Like our genetic makeup, we take for granted to some extent. And we just say, oh yeah, that's human genetic makeup. But what is human genetic makeup actually made of, right? Like where does our genetic makeup actually come from? And I think that's a much bigger story than the one that's being told.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, thank
Great.
you.
Oh, hi,
You're
Regina.
welcome.
Hello,
Hi, Regina.
sorry, I
We
can't
hear
get
you.
the camera to work.
That's
Okay. Well,
nice
to hear your voice. Yeah. Regina, do you have any comments on that you want to say?
Yeah, there are people who are speaking who point out the fact that some of the hominoid evidence is that for millions of years, they pounded the same stones in the same way and didn't make any improvements. And then all of a sudden they did. So So it certainly seems as if there was some intervention at some point. And of course, in the Sumerian history, there is Enki, who was supposedly doing some tinkering at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Marshall was pointing to, I mean, Francis Crick, who's, one of the couple guys who literally won the Nobel Prize for, the DNA structure, really presenting how that works and operates, in his later life, released a paper called Directed Panspermia, in which he says, we conclude that it is possible that life reached the Earth in this way, meaning that life reached the Earth from the stars. So it's not fringe science. although we do joke about the fact that he got pretty old by the time he released that paper, and so it's easy for the mainstream scientists to just go, he's just old, and he's starting to go crazy or something. But yeah,
like
really
they did with Einstein. They did that with Einstein, Wheeler, and Bohm. They're just old and crazy now. All right, just ignore what they're saying.
Yeah. Instead, they were like literally doing their greatest mastery and integration work at that time. So
yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Regina.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Jamie, what's cooking for you, man?
Sometimes you have to work, for decades and chip away at all these possibilities. And then you refine and refine and refine. And then these guys in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s go, oh, now that I've dug into this for 60 years or whatever, now I'm getting to this next level of understanding. They put it out, and then people do ageism on them. And it's just like another form of discrimination, really. The older folks,
censorship.
As I get older myself, right? Like I'm like, oh, older people, I get it differently now than I did when I was a teenager. And I was like, oh, older people, they don't get it. I'm like, oh, actually, old people really do get it. So we should probably listen to our elders way more than we do, not just in science, right? In social things too, because they experienced stuff when they were young that's very different than most people that are alive today as the human population gets younger. So thank you, Francis Crick, because like he stuck his neck way out there. Can you imagine? I mean, that was a while ago. He's like, yeah, I think there's extraterrestrials. And people are like, not having it. And now, as you've seen, it's like everywhere, right? It's mainstream news media putting it on the front page, coming from, military industrial complex, Air Force and Navy of various countries, not just some guy with a Polaroid and some like fishing pole with some fake model on a fishing line or something like in the old days. We're talking, footage from whatever fighter jets and stuff. So it's kind of amazing to me that it's not more talked about and more on the mainstream news. Like these skulls are everywhere. When I first saw Nassim present the skulls, I had never seen a picture of an elongated skull, whatever it was 15 years ago. And now you can just see that there's skulls like this all over the place. The photos are everywhere. They're in museums, they're in private collections. People like Brian Forrester have been talking about it a lot. And it's kind of amazing to me that it's not more on the edge. We're seeing it come. It's just the wave just is building. It couldn't come fast enough for us here at Resonance Science Foundation, but it's coming around. It's really exciting to see that. And all across the board, like every day there's new scientific articles coming out that are pointing to a more connected, more quantum wormhole infested space-time continuum kind of look at things, a much more unified way of looking at all the physics. I think people are realizing that compartmentalization and reductionism in general in universities is not as good as having all of the disciplines collaborate and talk to each other and cross-disciplinary studies and integrate information more. Because we did a good job of slicing the pie up into a lot of different disciplines and going deep into each discipline, but we haven't spent nearly as much time trying to integrate all of them. Aha, look who's just joined us. Dr.
Yay.
Inez.
I'm sorry for the delay. Had no idea there was a change in the frame of reference in time.
We got to get rid of that.
Yeah,
We
they
got to
pull
get
that
rid of
on
that.
us
There was
every
some
year.
bureaucrat in 1910 who put that on us.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
did this happen? When did you change the time? I'm completely lost here.
On Sunday.
Sunday at 2 in the
Sunday.
morning. It became Sunday at 3.
But we
in the
never
morning.
tell anybody. We just let them, oh, you're late. Ha ha ha.
That's part of the
Scramble and go
fun.
with it.
Perfect.
It's all good, Inez. All good. Glad you could join us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very happy to be here.
Jamie was just giving a little introduction and catching up with everybody, and we'll pass it to
Okay.
you.
Jamie, you have a
Yeah.
question. You have a question selected here too, I think.
Well,
yeah?
let's let Inez do her intro first, and then we'll jump to the questions.
Okay. Okay.
In other
Well,
words, what have you been up to, Inez? I know what you've been up to because we've been chatting about it. Maybe you could tell them.
yeah. Well, we're on the final. Let's say on the final process of correcting Model 7. As you all know, well,
Yeah.
Model 7 is the most recent section or portion of the course of the elective we have of the Unified Science course we had. Which only had 6 models. Now we're putting Model 7, which is the recent works of Nassim and the team. So the recent publications, the recent art papers, and also what's up with the scientific community around the globe and all their observations and experiments that go in the direction of, let's say, confirming the holographic model, the generalized holographic model. So very enthusiastic about it. And so we're in the final stage, let's say, just doing the final minor corrections. And so that has taken me like the whole last month of that. So it's just, but I think it will be like very, very soon. I'm hoping that will be the case. And then having a little bit of other things small like conferences on the holographic theory and model that have been given around, and also consciousness. So that has been a little bit of yeah.
Great.
Well,
Great.
yeah.
Excited for that.
Yeah, we're gonna
really,
give birth soon, so it's exhausting.
Good.
Yeah, Inez did a really good
Feeling it.
job, you guys. She really dug deep into the physics and explaining this, because there's been about 4 or 5 papers that Nassim has put out since the Academy was launched. So she had quite a job to integrate all that information, because it's like I was just describing earlier, same thing for Nassim. He worked for decades and he goes, oh, after 30 years, I finally, okay, boom, 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 puts out these papers. And then he's like, okay, Inez, make module 7 out of those papers. And she's like, okay, I'll try to figure out how to explain everything you thought of in the last 5 years. But you did, good job. It was
amazing. I learned a lot. I mean, there are many things that you take for granted. I thought I had, like completely understood the model. And then I was like, oh, Jesus, what, not so sure. I did not, that was, the most important part for me was that, like, I learned a lot. So imagine if I was learning by doing the model, so I hope that will transfer to you, to the people who see.
Sure, well, I can't wait to read through it. I know we're all going to learn a lot, and thanks to your integration of all that knowledge and all that information to synthesize it into something that can be presented coherently. I'm sure it's going to be beneficial.
Yeah, it's really detailed, really detailed. Maybe it's going to be a little bit long because the more you have to explain, the longer it gets. So I really didn't want to spare any space with that. So I was given like free space. So I said, okay, let's go ahead. And so it's
great.
Good job. Take the time, help people
Yay.
understand it step by step. It's so much better that way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So well,
good.
That's it.
Good. Well, we're glad you're here. You can start looking around at questions we have. I think we can just pull from anything. But Jamie, do you want to jump in on the question while Inez takes a look at what's
Sure. I also wanted to say welcome to all the folks on this call from around the world. I love seeing in the chat when you put where you're from. You know, we already have folks from Europe, folks from Africa. I never tire from the feeling of seeing people in a chat that are all over the world, because it gives you that like sense of the quantum wormhole network of space-time and of how we're literally connected on the surface of this planet. And a great analogy I just want to throw out that it's easy to tell people to remind them how connected we are is you're like, okay, we're all on a sphere. Yes, we're on a sphere. It's not flat. And all of our feet, right, are being drawn to the gravitational center of the earth. So everybody's feet are being drawn to the same singularity. And yet, if you look up, the crown chakra is opening up to a totally different, infinite slice of the universe, right? So like every human has different information coming in this way, but all the information is connected that way. So there is like the kind of peach fuzz antenna that the human race is, and all biology. I'm not excluding, you know, bacteria out of this either. It's like, oh, I see. Yeah, right. We're just one giant biocrystal sphere, you know, rotating around a sphere, rotating around a sphere, rotating around a sphere, infinite fractal holographic rotation, which leads me to my question in the Q&A, which is from
Yes.
Oriana. And Oriana says, can you speak to how a torus becomes a double torus and the factors that allow a double torus to become a torus? What are the geometric force of the spin? Well, this is a good question because this is pretty confusing, because a lot of times you'll see Nassim say dual torus or double torus, and a lot of the animations we have are double torus. And then a lot of times you just hear somebody say torus, like it's a single torus. And the confusion, I think, is that it's both, right? And the way to visualize, one way to visualize this, hi, Ariana, is that you can look at like a yin yang, and you know Nassim's done a 3D animation of the yin yang, and the yin yang's a torus, but so is each of the dots inside the torus. So it's a dual torus and a torus, where one hemisphere is rotating in one direction, the other hemisphere is rotating in the other direction. And especially in the case of like black holes, which everything is, from the proton to stars to galaxies, the information goes in through the vortices that are spinning like down to stillness, right? Like water going down the drain. One hemisphere is spinning in one direction, the other hemisphere is spinning the other direction. The information goes out in every direction. It doesn't just go in one direction. It can cross hemispheres. It can go out in every way of 360 degrees out of the sphere. However, it's much more concentrated along the equator of the object, which is why, for example, at night, you look into the stars, and you see that stripe of stars that's denser called the Milky Way. That's the galactic plane, or the accretion disk along the equator of our galaxy, which has two hemispheres as well, and the giant torus bubbles of X-rays and gamma rays that are 50,000 light years across coming out of it. And so it is kind of confusing because it's torus and double torus at the same time. When it's a debate of whether it's one thing or another, it's usually both. And if somebody else like Inez wants to tackle the physics, the forces of it, that would be great. I like just going for like the layman's explanation of when you're trying to explain this to other people, which is what I do a lot of.
Yeah, okay, sure. Hi, Oriana. I love your question because, you know, I saw you when in Nassim's live with Nassim, and I'm sure that comes from that.
It does. It does.
Yeah, because it was, okay, so this is all because of the dynamics of the singularity. So you have a singularity, okay? This singularity is basically coming from the, well, from many, you can see it from many perspectives. One of them is the fact that you have not, there's an absence of an absolute reference frame of observation. Mm-hmm. So this means that you would have, when you have a spin, I'm spinning on this direction, but you will see it on the opposite direction. I'm seeing a clockwise spin, you would see a counterclockwise spin. So in some sense, this, so when you have one direction, one coil, because there's no way of like building a reference, an absolute reference frame of observation, you will have that only this movement will become somehow four, because this is the result of having a lack of reference frame, of an absolute reference frame. So if I have a coil, and maybe I have a coil over here. Yeah, I have a coil. So because this is how I explain a little bit of that. I have a coil here. I have many coils, but wait. So I have one coil here. Okay, I have this coil. And you can say, okay, so this is the situation. There's two things here, sense and direction. Okay, so there's the sense, which is right or left, and the direction, which is going from me to you or from you to me. So these are four variables that we have to take into account when observing just one coil. So in this only one coil, depending, there's the chirality, which is implicit here. The chirality is the fact that if I'm seeing this going counterclockwise in this direction, you will see it clockwise in the opposite direction. So you see there's no absolute frame of observation. This depends on whether you are on this side or on the other side, you will see it as one thing or as the other, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So taking that into account, I could say that if I have this coil and its mirror image, which would be its chiral, and I would say, okay, I have only two coils. In reality, I have four, because there's no way of knowing if I don't see the time evolution, the evolution in time. There's no way I can see this started here and ended there, or the opposite. And depending on that, I can say it is a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. So I'm just giving all these features so that we can understand that this is all happening or causing singularity to have the dynamics it has. Okay, because singularity from this perspective is happening. It is an infinite point. We know that, but it is also coming from the fact that there's no absolute frame of observation. So the dynamics of the singularity, you could also explore them through the equations that Nassim solved through the Einstein's fields equation, right? When he included torque and Coriolis. So this was the way that he could mathematically explain what I'm just saying. So what I'm trying to say here is that what we call torque or spin, because this is all spin, right? We're talking about spiraling to one sense or to the other. So curiously enough, when you solve Einstein's fields equation and you include torque, and there's this second, let's say, secondary effect, which is the chirality, which emerges from that, then you are accounting what I just said, and that's the result, this double torus dynamics, which is basically just saying that at some point we have all these dynamics because this is the way the system is trying to reference itself.
Okay, so here's what I'm looking for in all of this is how evolution encodes in a sense of all the expansion is all the compression, right? Okay. So that spin is both directions. So I'm looking for how evolution, all that is in our observable universe, is like a sphere within this unobservable universe. So the inner torus then is going inside of the unobservable universe deeper and deeper, encoding all of evolution as it spirals in. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so in that we have a singularity within our heart, right? It's called the pacemaker. It's in the right atrium. So if that singularity, of which there's only one, and we're inside of that interfacing with Earth for the first time in utero, and that evolution then is what is 3.8 billion years from the first cell of fossil, pulsing this rhythmic pattern that is a fractal unfolding of all of evolution in 3.8 billion years, and we do it in 9 months to go from a one cell to a multi-cell being. So that pulsing precision of fractal unfolding must be compressed at the same rhythmic pattern that is expressed. That'll make sense? Okay, so what I'm asking then is this, what I'm sensing, and maybe I'm calling it the double torus, but it feels like there's a wobble, and that this wobble is where we can internally feel into a point of most influence, such that as an earthing being, and don't you love I did this for you, Adam. Welcome.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Just beamed in for the occasion. So in this wobbling, we have an opportunity to align with the next fractal unfolding of rhythmic pattern, and that galactic double sphere that you're speaking to. If that's aligned with a universal torus, then that should also be encoded within this compression into our unobservable universe that we now call sub-Planckian field. We can't see, but we know it's there.
Do you mind if I jump in on this one a little bit?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sure. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, there's layers and layers you're stacking on this, and they're beautiful. But let's make sure like we're grounding with the premise, the fundamentals, and then let's build from that. So like, first, Taurus energy is going up or down one direction on the outside, entering a vortex, going through that vortex and coming out the other side. So this is like a one directional pipeline that we consider to be generally the way that, if we account for, as was saying, torque, spin, tension, and directionality in movement of PSU or movement of energy, then a single torus has sort of a one directional pipe going through the middle. And this gives it certain qualities, and, total stability is not necessarily one of them, because there's always going to be energy moving through it and out the other side. And related to some of the metaphysics you're talking about, that's also a property that we see in high transformation states, but not in stable states. For example, when you put your hand over fire, all that energy is sucking and going up through the fire and out the top, and the air is getting sucked back in. It's going one direction, right? Now, if we're looking at something like the proton or a cell, or like a stable biocrystal of a different kinds, now what we're looking at is an object that has a polar relationship in terms of spin and torsion, which means that at both poles, there's a vortice going into the object. But what that does is that creates this kind of tricky situation where you're talking about energy coming in to the top and energy going in to the bottom. And from the bottom and from the top, what happens in the middle? Well, there's only like a couple things that can happen, right? Like either that energy is going into and gating through, a singularity wormhole into other locations in space-time, which may be possible, especially, all the way back to Dan Winter's work, which I was studying in high school. Like he was talking about how you take two phi spirals and you get them lined up from a dodecahedral structure and aligned to the middle, and they enter a point, which is an infinite point. So there's possibility of sort of infinite compression at this point. That's really what I'm getting at. And at the same time, there also has to be energy going out through the structure, because that energy has to somehow reach the event horizon again to make its way back up to the poles, right? For it to sustain itself. So in the quantum geometry work, what I assess is that it's actually right at that equator, where the two toruses meet, that it's along that equator where PSU or energy is actually blooming omnidirectionally across that disk, right? And it's going all the way out, and it's literally the acceleration of that new energy being created going up to and reaching the speed of light that sets the boundary condition for the size of the proton. So in other words, it's as that speeds up, getting bigger and bigger circles to the point where it finally hits a circle size where now that energy is moving at light speed. Boom, that's the edge of the proton. That's where it becomes totally stable. It sets the event horizon. It sets the place where, you know, the torsion moves up and down. And I think that while it's, you know, expressed a little differently at, say, a cellular scale or at a biocrystal scale, the body scale, fundamentally the property is the same, that there's this sort of scalar horizon to any vortex of energy. And so you could even think of it as like every chakra in your body has this plane of energy where that singularity is meeting, and
Right.
there's vortices going in from both sides. And that's part of how the stability and the fractality operate.
Okay, so I'm looking for like a quantum leap or this leap within the fractal unfolding pattern. And here's my question, in which what all that you're describing of this vortex, all that energy coming back into the system, where's all that information go? And if it's going through the singularity, is it compressing in and capturing that in a compressing continuation deeper still? So if we go out and explore the universe and go, look at all these galaxies, where's all that information actually come in and be compressed into our system, and we send out more energy to look even further, and the system continues to move. So there's a fractal rhythm that I'm sensing, feeling into, that there's a moment that it shifts, that it leaps to the next information organization. So that proton goes, whoa, I'm a molecule. Look at that. I can make water. Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah. It's you know, it's the simple way of looking at how that occurs is, especially this, I think it's going to be evident in the paper that Nassim is near to finishing, is that it's about harmonic resonances. When you say, you know, what is that quantum shift that occurs fractally for that embedded continuous movement to compress at different scales, has to do with the resonances directly tied to what Adam said about, you know, when the proton finds its boundary limit. That's a harmonic fluctuation that defines at that scale, which then carries through across all scales for the same phenomenon to occur, to define the boundaries at all scales. And so that's where the continuity of the dynamics, which I think is what you're inquiring about, how does that quantum shift happening at each scale? That's how that would be tied in.
It's all one singularity, but within that spin, is it all one vortex, and that the fractal of this vortex becomes individualized matter in the world?
Yeah.
In different
It's one
spins,
in
but
many
it
and
actually is
many in
one
one.
vortex. Does that make
It's
sense?
one in many and many in one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Oh,
all
yeah.
differentiated. And
It's
all
hard
the
to-
differentiated parts are working in a natural sort of synergy and synarchy.
It's hard to distill things down and make it simple when you're talking about stuff like turbulence, right? Because you get these vortices happening, and then smaller ones come off of it. It's a soup. It's the smoothie universe, as Nassim likes to say, right? It's just like PSUs, Planck spherical units, the stuff that makes space-time, that makes protons. We're in a soup of that, just spinning at all scales. And there's this, it's more about the fractal relationship of scale and then of frequency and vibration in resonance, like the harmonic series that is above a note. When you play any note, you're actually hearing all the notes, but some of them are really quiet in relation. It's the harmonic series. So I kind of think of it like that it's a harmonic series of nested infinite fractal toruses.
Okay, and then the time crystal that they just discovered a few years ago.
And we're going to have to complete the conversation.
All right, next
I
time, the
know.
time crystal.
I'm
She's
sorry,
like, I'm on it
time.
next time.
Next time, Oriana. We have
Marshall
like-
cracking the
we're only
whip.
on
A bell
question
ringing
2.
from the beginning
Yeah,
of time.
I just wanted to
We're
add
only on
something.
question
Sorry, I just
2,
wanted
so.
to add something. Just a difference between the double torus and single torus. In a single torus, you don't need singularity. There's no need for a singularity. It's the double torus is precisely the consequences of having a singularity. So this is
Oh,
yeah, this is important to
interesting.
know.
Okay, well, that just opened up 10 more questions. Yeah.
Okay,
and
she'll
that's
catch up with
help.
us in the Millennium Falcon next
Yeah,
time.
we can have another
Yeah.
session.
Okay, bye all. Thank you
Good
so
to
much.
see you, Ariana.
Bye.
Bye, Ariane. Thanks.
See you later.
Okay.
Cool.
See, Adam, we have you for
Well.
like 10 more minutes maybe or so.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
gotta,
I'll
want to
go.
jump in
Sure.
another question? Yeah, great.
Absolutely. I have one picked out from Heather Lowe, which I think actually will have some additional interleaving with that last series of questions. So it should be interesting. She says, has Nassim or you guys at the Resonance Academy done any research on the physics of what some may call remote viewing? I call this event horizon access. I'm doing armchair research, but I believe I access the event horizon when I intake information via this remote viewing. I'm wondering if the math would once again prove the fractal universe again via event horizon access, because here we can interact with space memory via the fractal math. There's a lot to the equation, but I think I'm onto something. Yeah, I think you are onto something there. So there's a couple things to talk about when talking about remote viewing and information access. And what this all really revolves around is the fundamental idea of entanglement. And there's different ways that we have postulated and looked at as being sort of the source of entanglement. One of those being the fact that there are a certain number of sort of termination points to the PSU crystalline stack in a proton that has been kind of described as having the possibility of being a hairy particle, meaning that there would be a bunch of wormhole networks extending off of the surface of the event horizon of every proton, and that those hairs or those wormholes would then be attaching that proton to other protons. In fact, lots of them, like 10 to the 40th of them. And yet there's an even deeper layer to this too, which is to say, well, if we think about the fabric and the structure of space-time itself as a weave of light, meaning as a fabric, really, but a fabric woven of light itself. And because it's all light and thus moving at the speed of light, it's all operating in itself in a state where time isn't really passing, right? Because once you're going light speed, you enter a kind of different frame of reference in terms of time. And now at this point, all of this light is interconnecting literally everything. It's making all the protons, it's making all the atoms, it's making all the stuff. And so then the idea is less like a ball with a bunch of hairs connecting off of it, and more like the entire field is already all stitched and interconnected. Literally the whole field may be made of wormhole networks. And, John Wheeler actually, postulates this fairly recently in his work on the sort of intersection of ER versus EPR, bridging Einstein-Rosen bridges with the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen entanglement paradox and connecting the dots between the two, right? So this helps us kind of look at our relationship with space-time in a new way, because we're all made of protons, so we're all these like spherical standing waves that are all like in an electromagnetic conjunction field with each other. In other words, all spinning off of each other's co-moving fields. And this thing that we're operating inside of is entangled with all kinds of stuff all over the place. And this then begs the question of the arising of consciousness and consciousness's effect on that. And what we've found, and Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research has found, and countless other people and organizations and cultures for thousands and thousands of years have found, is that yes, consciousness absolutely affects this fundamental field of space-time. And this suggests that perhaps our entanglement with objects is actually guided by the focus of our awareness and or our consciousness. And so to some extent, objects that we're focused on or thinking about, or spaces that we're thinking about or perceiving, actually become linked to us in a way that information in observation of that space becomes possible to receive, even if we're in another location or another place. Now, every mother knows this experience, because if you've had a child, you know exactly what it feels like to suddenly feel your child react to something, and they're outside or they're, at a friend's house, and, they call and they find out that their child just skinned their knee or whatever, and they're hurting and crying. The emotional capacity for us to exchange information through entanglement is obvious. But then it gets really interesting when you start applying that to, well, what happens if I consciously choose to move the point from which I'm perceiving things? What happens when I move my point of view? Because all of the universe and all of relativity is all based on the fact that we can change our point of view, and our point of view or point of reference changes how we perceive everything else. And we usually think about that as wherever the instrument is, right? The eyes that are perceiving the whatever. But the definition of your instrument starts to get a little foggy when you start realizing that your vehicle is actually not just constrained to what's inside of the cells in your body, that your vehicle is actually perhaps transcendent of that to some extent, and incorporating of that to the point where you could move the vehicle of your mental perception to a new point of reference and now perceive information in the construct of space-time from that new point of reference, which is literally quite as simple as just moving your instrument's point of reference along the entangled space-time network that already exists, and then just gathering the information from there the same way that you do with this really rich sensory instrument. So does that help give you a nice foundation to think about that further and explore that further? That's for you, Heather. Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you.
You have to unmute your audio for us.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So for myself, to change it, like the more and more that I've done it, and the more accurate I am, I came to realize from a physics standpoint that I'm really seeing it fractally. And in fact, sometimes, like over the years, I used to like change my position, before I really understood the physics, or I would flip my drawings, or I would do something because I had it exact from where I had viewed, but it's now I realize I'm seeing it fractally. So in my sort of armchair physics, I'm like, it's coming fractally to me. And for myself, and this is where from a, health standpoint or, biological standpoint, for me, I think all human beings, I really think there's something to the ability of our pineal gland to do this. I don't think this is any kind of voodoo anything. I think it's rather easily explained. I think that since our own pineal gland is 100%, all it does is dictate light or dark, I think there's some possibility that we are utilizing it in a different a light wave form or some sort of math there where that's really what I'm using to communicate, because I can physically, it's almost like when you squint your eyes or you contract a muscle, it's the same thing I'm doing with my pineal gland. And then, if it's dark out, if it's night, then it's much easier for me. I mean, within minutes, walking, eyes open. But if it's daylight and it's very bright, then I have to go where it's dark. So, I mean, over the years, I've just, and I think anybody can do this. I know anybody can do it, but the math for me is so brilliant because I really think that you're seeing when people are viewing this, like you say, through the entanglement, through the wormholes. I still think everything that we see is like from these fractal things, because sometimes to put it together, I literally have to like superimpose, or like the other gal was saying, like you flip it, right? Because I'm not seeing it straight on often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and is really interesting, because changing your point of perception can have a lot of different effects. I mean, what's to say you can't just invert your perception? Like you're looking at me right now and I'm on a screen, but you're actually seeing me inverted from how I am. And that's the nature of the fact that it's going through a lens, digitally being repurposed the opposite way. So we can see ourselves in an inverted manner. There's no reason we can't see other things in an inverted manner. I've certainly had dreams where stuff was all backwards and all the text was backwards. And it was like, whoa, did I just walk through the looking glass somehow, But I think what you're saying about the sort of receiving it fractally is really powerful and potent, because I literally look at this, that every connection that you make in your life, every object that you store information about, everything that you are having an experience of, to some extent, more or less, you create entanglement with those objects. You've definitely got the capacity for it among all the 10 to the 40s and all of the, hundreds of trillions of protons that you have in your body, right? So you've got this like massive amount of potential to be connected to things. And I think at every moment we're sort of adjusting that web of filtration of that fractal matrix of connection. And you can choose to fully kind of turn off or block out certain sectors if it's really annoying you, like if the litter box stinks or something, and your cat, and it's like, and you don't have time to deal with it right now, but you keep thinking about the litter box. Well, you can kind of just block out the litter box for a while, or set a time release to like remind yourself about that later, and stay focused on what's important to you right now. And so we're constantly trying to filter the field of this massively fractal input of information. And it's infinite. It's literally, we're tapped into an infinite field of information, but we're choosing with our attention, paying our attention to things. That's actually creating a tension between us and those things, a link that's allowing us to feel and experience the information of those things.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Heather. Great inquiry.
All right. That's it for me, guys. So fun. I love you. Have a great time.
Yeah. Love you too, brother. Thanks for being here. As always.
Thanks,
Catch
everybody.
you next time.
All right. See you guys soon. Aloha.
Aloha. I know there's a couple here that are for me, but I wanted to check in with you and S. I don't know, usually you are only here for the first hour as well. And the timing was a little different today for you. How's your timing today?
Longer. Yeah, I could stay today because of switching in the time, so it's okay.
Okay, I'll go for a couple of them that are here that have my name in them. The first is from Sophie Mahoney, saying, hello from Nicaragua. I have a question regarding the language of feelings and geometry. Is there currently research that links specific geometry to specific feelings? For example, specifically for me, if the 64 city were feelings, would it be possible that each have a specific geometry? Someone mentioned I Ching, but that refers to the element. So I'm just going to pull up Sophie here before I go into the. Okay. Should be coming on soon, Sophie. So yeah, this is it's a fascinating question that I think many of us consider. How do we relate? Hi, Sophie.
Hello.
So how do we relate something as seemingly ephemeral and in a way non-physical as feelings to something so specific as geometry. And as is, I would start by saying, as is probably common to every question and every answer that we ever have, is it's going to really depend on the frame of reference, just like Ines was talking about, showing that this different frame of references, frames of points of perception, where do you actually look at this from? Which frame of reference do you start with to even consider this? Is definitely going to be an important one for at least how I would approach this question. So the first thing is to say, my understanding is we're talking about human feelings, and human feelings are experienced in a human body, and they're very much associated with our experience of being in a body. And as is well known, the emotions and feelings we have will trigger cascades of hormones, and you know, the endocrine system will put out chemicals that are specific, very specific to certain emotional feelings. That and these chemical molecular structures are obviously very highly geometric, and so that in itself points to a specific geometry associated with specific feelings. I don't know what the geometries are to speak to that specifically, but nonetheless, there is a direct correlation when it comes to how our experience of a feeling is actually creating a geometric relationship within the body itself. And whether that geometry is so-called creating the feeling that we have, or if it's the other way around, of course, it's usually both and, you know, you can't really chicken and egg. It's undefinable at a certain point. Again, it's about the frame of reference. And so I would just sort of start by kind of thinking of it from that perspective. And whether there's then something that's more beyond the body and the chemistry that is associated with some kind of a geometry with feelings, that could perhaps be the case as well. And I haven't really thought about that enough to be in any kind of a sense describing something informed. But that's my sense of at least the place to start that inquiry. How about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I could add a little thing, Marshall, here. Maybe
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
related to how I understand like geometry. Like for me, geometry, it's like a very compact way of expressing or condensing a concept. No, you have a concept in each geometry. Like for instance, in the sphere, this spherical shape, this geometry, you have the concept of this perfect symmetry, no matter where you see it from, you know? So when you see things, no matter where you see it from, you see the same. That's something it's a concept in itself, and it brings an emotion to it. Okay, like for instance, if you're trapped in the same, and you see everything the same, like, oh, everything is shit, sorry for the word. Oh, everything is like mess, and everything you look at is you're like somehow closed in the system of everything is the same. So so there's this part which is the concept, a concept that is englobed in a geometry. Like says the symmetries, for instance, in geometry is when you talk about geometry, like the angles and the positions of the sticks and all of that, that gives you a certain concept. And it's really difficult to associate, to really decode the concept which is behind a geometry, really difficult. So very complex information. I imagine that if there was a civilization which is really advanced, I would imagine communicating with me through like cymatics, like sending like the dolphins do, these bunches of geometry, and I would be like, what the fuck? I mean, I don't have the time to decode. I wouldn't have the time to decode this information. But that would be the easiest way to send information. You know, through this geometry, because there's concepts behind that, and those concepts are also that I will be inevitably associated to an emotion, because energy in motion, it's emotion, but energy, it's a particular combination of operation symmetries. So that it's also a way of encoding, it's also geometry. So you could say that geometry encodes information, it is encoding the energy, let's say the energy imprint, and all of that brings emotions to the table. Emotions, you could just say emotions are energies in motion, but that's obeying some kind of symmetry, and so for me, symmetry operations and geometry and concepts are very, very much related. So when in your question you say the language and feelings and geometry, for sure there is a link. There must be a very direct link between one thing and the other. And I don't know if you're familiar with this work of the template ceremonies. From the people I know that have worked more like this kind of things, I don't know that much. Like, for instance, I guess like more like Marshall or maybe Adam, but the ones I have got to learn about, like Dan Winter's work or on geometry, or maybe this template ceremonies, they work fully on geometry and these concepts which are behind each geometry. So, and I know people that dream in cymatics. I know people, I even once had a dream in which I could see the sun, and the sun was patterns, cymatic patterns. And I was like, oh my God, so this is a real universal language. No, I just had that once, but I was like, oh Jesus. So our language is really like very probably primitive with respect to these other ways of expressing. And
right,
that was
which is what prompted my question, because a lot of time we speak of emotions when I'm actually asking about feelings, and they're different. So I specifically I'm specifically referring to feelings, and because this has been my line of study and research, and I can sense that the reason why I came across Resonance Science Foundation and specifically Marshall's work is because there is a very tangible link between understanding the language, the raw language of feelings, and it being connected to a very advanced geometry. And which, when I see you wear the crystal, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that every single, once we identify the language, so a specific language of, specific words that represents these feelings, then there's a geometry attached to it, which then will refine, will give us the ability to have a less corrupted structure, physical structure. Which then we build an emotional structure on top of that, because the emotional structure is built on the structure of feelings, and something that Marshall said, or maybe it was Jamie. There's also something about a texture, and I know geometry speaks of texture, but there's something also, and this is why I'm asking this question, because I'm wondering, is there already research out there when it comes to that? Yeah, thank you.
Can I tag team on this, Marshall, too?
Of course, Jamie.
Well, there's another question in the chat from an anonymous attendee, and it says, similar to Sophie's question, how can we perceive the frequency of an emotion more scientifically, rather than just thinking, oh, this feels good equals high frequency, or this feels bad equals low frequency? And that's another, it comes back to what I actually was saying before about music and the harmonic series and resonance. And there's reasons why some chords or some combinations of tones sound good, and you get an uplifting feeling from the music. And then other times, if your instrument is out of tune, and multiple instruments that are out of tune are playing a bunch of tritones and like weird intervals and doing micro tuning quarter notes and stuff, you might like furrow your brow and turn your head and be like, oh man, what is that, right? There's a huge difference, right? All you have to do is change all those notes by only a few hertz, only a few cycles, and it goes sideways, and you're like, oh. And we know that frequency, right, through cymatics, you get a plate and you put sand on there and you put the frequency of a tone on there, it's going to make a geometry. And so there's going to be constructive kind of interference patterns in the music that create beautiful symmetric radial symmetry, stuff like this. And then there's other ones where it's kind of chaotic and you're not feeling it. Literally, like that phrase pertains. So it really, anything you're talking about with geometry is also at the same time frequency, resonance, vibration, harmonic series, and that scales.
Right.
So it ties into the ideal of a hollow fractal field where it's smaller and smaller vibrations and larger vibrations all nested inside of each other. So it's not as simple as, oh, that's a low tone, so that's bad. I like bass. I want a lot of bass in my music, and that's low frequency. Low frequency is not bad if it's in tune with the rest of the frequencies. And same thing, high frequency can be shrill and, oh, that mix is weird. You listen to some old stuff through old speakers and it's all mid-range and stuff. So it's not as simple as low is bad and high is good. So it is geometry, it is cymatics. I think cymatics is kind of the key. It's like we are cymatics, we're cymatics of the Planck field.
So then tagging back on what you're saying, Jamie, what would be, because I learned energy medicine and energy medicine practitioners were very strong visual and can see energy will identify geometry, but it's kind of a broad, it'll be the figure eight, or it'll be a diamond. So they identify specific geometry, but within the field. So pertaining to research, how could this kind of research be so it kind of moves away from the woo-woo aspect of, when we talk about energy and when we speak of the language of feelings, that's I guess in my question, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that very tangible aspect of giving it a frame of reference which can have validity through research. Is it already been done, or is it not? Is there nothing of that right now?
One thing I'll just say quick about that is to check out the dolphin research where they're doing cymatics analysis of dolphins, because dolphins produce an echolocation beam right from their forehead. We don't have that same kind of capability. We don't have 3 lobes to our brain. We can't triangulate our thoughts. But they're studying the dolphins and they're projecting stuff, and they can feel texture with that. They just found out. I think we just heard about that last week or something.
Right, the texture. Yeah,
that's
great.
So again, it's just like,
yeah.
That's where they're tuned in. And if you study like the glyphs, maybe you can come up, oh, you can tell that this dolphin's in distress. And here's what that call that's coming out of their head looks like in cymatics. And now you could tell these 2 dolphins are playing and they're partners and they're in love. So let's check out what those cymatic beams look like. Maybe you could start to come up with a language or a correlation of feeling to frequency or geometry to feeling, thanks to the dolphins that I again think are probably smarter than us.
That's awesome, because cymatics has been coming into, I just literally just 6 months ago started learning about it and reading about it, and so thank you so much.
I'm not aware of a particular study that's really like the cosmometry of feelings. I'm not aware of a study per se of that. That would be very interesting to explore. One other thing that's coming to my mind is the work of a woman named Eileen McCusick in biofield tuning. If you go to biofieldtuning.com, she works with tuning forks and the human biofield to be able to sense the held frequency, the held patterns of past trauma, emotion, whatever it might be that are in the field, and then be able to take that and bring it back integrated into the full biofield physical body system with tremendous
Awesome.
results. So that one, I don't know that she specifically has correlated geometry, but it might be a very interesting resource to begin to look into for that
Yeah.
purpose as well.
Yeah,
Great.
what I'm
Thank you, Sophie.
envisioning is that next level beyond the tuning forks, where specific geometry for specific. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You're so welcome. Thanks for being here.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add regarding the high frequency or low frequency. That made me think that the only difference I would see, because I agree that Jamie, what you just said is awesome. Like it's just a matter of our harmony, of having harmony. So it doesn't bend if it's high or low. But I would just say that the speed of processing information would be possible. It's just a matter of processing information. So in high frequency, you're processing information much faster. That doesn't mean that you feel better or worse, or you're a good or a bad person.
Sure.
Just processing information easier, faster. In fact, I have many people that are so brilliant processing information so fast, but they're like a mess in emotions and feelings. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing
slow
to do
down
with
a little bit.
But and on the contrary, people who are like, you see them slowly processing, like they're slowly processing, and they're calm, they're serene, like, oh, they're good to be around because they're like very easygoing and all that. So it's like, so I just thought about that in that sense of processing information. That was like my
Great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, thanks for that. All right. I'll just jump in on another one real quick because I mentioned I would do these two. This one's from Janine Dubois saying, question relates to hearing a longtime skilled energy healer, Donna Eden, sharing that she's seeing diamonds in the energy everywhere these days. I found myself wondering if she is seeing some aspect of the geometry of space. What are your thoughts? And let me bring you up, Janine. So, diamonds everywhere is a good question. I'm familiar with what Donna Eden has been saying. Hi, Janine. Nice to see you again.
Oh, good to see you. And Jamie too. I didn't know, Jamie, if that was your bailiwick as well.
Yes, of course. So, so diamonds, I believe in this context, we're talking about octahedron structures, which is the fundamental geometry of diamonds. And yes, so at the most fundamental level of the geometry of space, which we could correlate directly to the Planck field as the point of reference where this occurs, is the geometry of equilibrium, where all of the dynamics settle into a coherent state where everything becomes basically still point, 0 point. It's where all the equilibrium cancels everything out to the point, if you think of it from an absolute perspective, it achieves absolute stillness, silence, 0 point. And the universe as we know it is a, go ahead, what's that?
I was just going to say also presence. Would that actually be like a representation of the 0 point stillness that you're talking about? Do you think?
Presence?
Mm-hmm. Presence.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, presence, yeah, I mean, this point becomes instantly non-local. It becomes universal. It has no reference to time, space, size, rotation. All of the things that we experience and can point at and observe and analyze have these different parameters. When you get to this point, all that goes away. And because it's the 0 reference around which all of that is occurring. And the name of that geometry, it begins with what's called the vector equilibrium. I guess I don't have a model of that here, but the vector equilibrium geometry is what Buckminster Fuller identified. It's also called a cube octahedron. That is the only geometric form where all of the vectors on the outside that shape it and the vectors that go to the center are equal. And so that's like the seed geometry of that 0-point equilibrium state. And then you can extend the equilibrium points in all directions and fill all space with that same geometry. And that's called an isotropic vector matrix, where all of the vectors are in equilibrium throughout the entire universe. And the Planck field that Nassim and everybody refers to, it tends towards that equilibrium state. That's why you have this 3D intersecting flower of life geometry that's, you know, fundamentally describing the basis for the Planck field. And that particular geometry is made of alternating tetrahedron, which are the three-sided pyramids, and octahedron, which are these diamond shapes. And so the entire field at that 0-point equilibrium state is tetrahedron and octahedron alternating with each other. And so when it comes to seeing diamonds, and your question is that, how does it relate to the geometry of space? Totally, absolutely, 100%. And it's one, you know, it's one reason that we see these octahedral shapes often. It's also seen at the largest scale, these super massive galactic clusters of galaxies, huge scale. They're organized in these octahedral, what they call an egg carton universe. You can see literally some scientists determined that they're organized in these octahedron systems. Jamie's got a good little
I thought you were going to get that, Jamie. Thank you.
I finally got my vector equilibrium model unattached from my computer power cord. You were talking before about the template ceremonies. The template ceremonies are done by Jiva and Juliet Carter. And this cube octahedron, this vector equilibrium, was made by Jiva at his workshop in Indonesia. And it's one that opens up like this. And what you can actually do is take your computer cable of your power supply and put it through this thing. And I was like, why would I do that? And he did a series of muscle tests with me with this, right? And I'm as skeptical as they come. I'm like, don't go woo-woo on me.
Yeah.
And he did the thing where, you push your arm, and he's like, now hold this. And he does it again. And I'm like, you didn't push as hard, do it again. And he's like, and he did it so many times. And I'm like, okay. So he's like, what I do is I put my power cable through this so it opens up. But in any case, this is the vector equilibrium. It's a cube octahedron. And you can see diamonds like crazy depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
And that's in the middle of a 64 tetrahedron grid, where if you put a whole bunch of tetrahedrons together, 64 of them, you get a vector equilibrium or a cube octahedron inside of a cube octahedron. And so again, looking at this from all different angles, all kinds of diamonds are popping out of there. And the cavities that are in the surface of this, these indentations are pyramids.
Oh, there they are. Yeah.
Those are 4 pyramids on the face. And if you put another pyramid the other way, you get an octahedron, which is a 3-dimensional diamond. So there you go. It's just fractal diamonds forever.
I am going to write to Donna Eden once the replay is out and reference this. And then who knows, she might join the Resonance Academy.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And if you watch,
I gotta say excuse me.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jamie, I got to say, what I say is one person's experience is another person's woo-woo.
Yeah.
Once you've experienced it, it's not woo-woo anymore. It's like, oh,
true.
That's real.
Yeah, true. I was going to say, if you haven't yet watched Thrive 2, we
I
did a whole bunch of animations. Yeah, so the animations in there are literally depicting what I just described.
Yeah, there is
The whole one where it's introducing that field. Yeah. So
yeah. So I really was thinking that was accurate, but it really helps to hear and see it in this context, and it'll be fun to share it with Donna.
And huge props to Marshall, because I know how long and hard he worked on those animations. He was the director of that whole aspect of the movie and worked closely with Foster and Kimberly. So Marshall, good work, man. The animations in Thrive are some of the highlights of the whole film for me.
Totally.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Marshall, I don't know if you were done talking. We kind of scooted over to looking at
that was complete. Yeah, that was the point, that this fundamental 0-point geometry field is diamonds everywhere. So, yeah.
Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, exactly. All right, be well.
You
See
too.
you again.
Bye.
Maybe I would like to address Luke's Archibald question, if there's time for that.
Let's do it. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, maybe you can call him on stage.
I will. I'll bring him up.
Thanks. When I move the table, this moves too much.
You can go ahead and read the question.
So he was asking about antimatter. Oh, here he goes. Hey,
Whoa.
hi.
Hi.
No.
I don't know if my question makes sense. You know, somebody raised a question on antimatter last time we saw Nassim.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my understanding, you know, that you had the water spinning and the inside.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, why do we see flares coming out of the sun where there are black holes? And yeah, is my question clear?
Yeah, I think it is. It's like you're wondering if now the thing is, okay, so in the dynamics of the singularity where you have this double torus and spin coming in and the counter spin coming out and all of that, but you have to take the whole system completely as a whole. So if you go to the other side of the universe, to this that back like down part of the universe where everything is opposite, no? What I'm trying to say is that in this side, this counter, the antimatter is part of the whole dynamics. It's part of the whole dynamics of the singularity. So it's not like we will have. I understand your question. It was the logical assumption to make. But then it's like saying that because we have this Coriolis effect, then the Earth is going to turn like that physically when it's just when this is just a secondary effect, which is affecting the fields, not matter, because the spin is just on one direction, like from this perspective. No, the Earth is moving in this sense, let's say, from the perspective, whatever it's moving in one direction, and this axe of spin. But since there's a singularity in the center, then there's all the dynamics going on, and so there's all these fluxes coming on of spin and counter spin, and you can produce this antimatter, but it is not as linear as saying the counter spin is going to be the antimatter, because to have that, you see what I'm saying? It's part of the whole dynamics of the system. So in this other part of the universe, you would say also then there's matter coming up. Yeah, it is, but it's the complete system, the complete dynamics of the system, not just, you see,
I thought it was too simple.
Yeah, it's like you have in this dynamics of the singularity, you will have all these expressions coming on, forces, fields, and all that we see emerging. And the same for the other side. But since it's part of the other of the dynamics of each side, then it is totally related to that part here and there. That doesn't mean that you won't have these effects seen here. You can create antimatter and all that, but that's part of the complete dynamics, not just that section that you extract from.
Okay, in that case, what are the flares coming out of the sun, coming out of the black spots of the black holes on the sun? What are they?
So
We see flares, like huge
that's
flames.
electromagnetic radiation, for instance. That's just, yeah.
Okay.
You could have also, part of that could be particles and antiparticles, but that's not, but you know what I mean? It's not saying that, that's a flux of antiparticles.
There are many options.
Yeah, there are many options, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's like
Good
this
to see you,
person
Luke.
said, it's more like twin universe that's made of antimatter. Yeah, it's like the counterside, which is the antimatter, and then you would have some presence of matter, which is just like a residual effect, but not.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Thank you
too.
all. This is great.
Good to see you too.
Bye.
Always good to see you, Luke. All right, well, let's just do a couple more before we wrap up. Jamie, is there one that you have seen that you wanted to go into?
There was, I think it disappeared. Maria asked, I think I can remember the name and the question, said, what was it?
Was
Oh my God.
energy?
I think I just
remember.
typed it. I just
Mass,
typed it.
energy, and geometry.
Yeah, does energy have a geometry, I think was the question, or is it just matter that has?
Or is it just matter?
But
I just typed an answer, but go ahead and
I'm
speak
gonna go for it and just be like, E equals mc squared. Basically, energy and matter are the same thing. So you answered your own question. Yes. And even gravity, because gravity, we now know, thanks to Einstein predicting it over 100 years ago and LIGO confirming it, gravity has waves. And so a wave in the structure of space, wait, what's the study of structure in space called? Geometry. So like even gravity has geometry. So yeah, I don't think can you name anything that doesn't have geometry? I don't think there is anything. Is there, Inez? Is there anything that doesn't have geometry? Let's ask cosmometry. Cosmometry. I mean, Marshall, can you think of anything that you can be like, no, there's no geometry there. No, it's gone.
Everything manifests in the universe is geometric. Part of what is, I think may cause confusion in considering something like this. Here comes Maria. Maria. Hello.
Hi, it's so great.
Hi, Maria.
Welcome. Great to have you here.
Yeah. Sorry, my question is really simple, but I just thought, okay, so does energy have geometry as well? I mean, because we've got the field and that's got geometric structure. And so does all geometry just come out of that?
And it's all one thing. It's all energy, whether we call it matter, whether we call it light, sound, water. It's all frequency, vibration, resonance. And so the distinction between energy and matter is just a perceptual one, meaning that, the matter is a dense form that we can see and touch, and yet it's just energy. That's all there is. And so energy is actually coordinating geometrically to create matter. And then when matter dissolves, when the energy radiates out, that energy is dispersed. And so the particular geometry of any given matter, substance, is released. And one of the, I think an important point to consider in this kind of a question is what geometry is, because we tend to think of geometry as kind of straight lines and angles as our idea of geometry. Geometry is spheres, it's toruses, it's whirlpools, it's flowing rivers, it's fractal relationships that are all informing what what we might call geometry or cosmometry, which is cosmic geometry, how that extends across all scales. And so every expression of energy, like you have the 0 point where it's not expressed, whenever it expresses as something that we can experience and observe and analyze, it immediately is going into a geometric relationship, whether it's a current of electrical energy that's spiraling in these Birkeland currents through space, whether it's organized as a spherical structure or as a crystalline structure, as matter. It's all immediately going into some kind of a geometric formation in order to even be expressed and observed. So the answer is yes.
I feel like you could almost just say, you could just say matter is geometric energy.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
and energy is geometric matter. So you can go both ways.
Thank you, Einstein.
Yeah.
Yes. Does that help clarify or expand
Yeah,
on your
because I was
understanding?
thinking, so energy becomes geometry, which creates matter. Is that right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
energy that's not yet created matter is also still geometric.
Still has its own geometric structure. Okay.
Yes.
But we might not
Yes.
think of it as matter. We might call it space.
Space. Yeah.
But space is
Yes.
absolutely packed as it can be with energy. It just doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
And it's why that is what is so fascinating is that the space is in perfectly balanced geometry. So it looks like 0 to us, but it's really
yes,
everything.
okay.
And where it's not in a perfect
Exactly.
balance, where you have a density gradient, because the cosmological density is not very dense and the quantum density is very dense, 122 orders of magnitude. That's such a huge density gradient. That's why everything spins at all scales. That's why everything spins.
Okay.
So it's
And
like
the spin
you've got
is
spinors.
geometry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The spin is geometry. That's the thing, is that when we think of energy as more of a moving, flowing, it's still geometry. It's all geometry. It's just not necessarily, and it actually is vectors and relationships as well. We have to include the vortices and the torus and all those fluid dynamics as part of what we mean by geometry.
You could say that that's geometry in motion. So that's just geometry in motion. So, but it's still geometry. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
And
right.
just to
Maria,
make things,
thanks for joining us.
to make it a little bit more confusing, in E equals MC squared, we don't exactly know what E is. We don't have a great definition for energy, and we don't have a great definition for matter.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I'm not exactly sure, equals, I'm not totally sure, times the speed of light, which I don't exactly know why it's that speed squared. But it's a very important equivalence, Even though you don't know what those things are, just knowing they're the same thing is huge. It helped us to make a lot of stuff, probably including the technology we're using right now.
Yeah.
So again, thank you, Einstein.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. Good to chat with you also.
All right, Maria. You too. Be well. All right.
Now we're down to the most difficult questions. They're super. Some of these are really challenging questions. I'm like, I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't have the answer. Some of them are a little challenging.
We can address the second from Jason. Up to what I know, the answer would be no. But,
is that the one about
octonians?
Yeah, Jason, octonians are being used now to explain
so
the next.
our octonians being used to explain the next paper. You might know that, but so you're saying no, they're not being used.
Yeah,
right?
no, I don't think so. Maybe they get incorporated, but up to the stage we're now in, I don't. They're not still.
Okay. We'll find out when the paper comes out if there's something.
But maybe at the
We
end,
could
maybe because it's a never-ending work, and then but we could like include this and then put that and so it's still progressing. So maybe at some point, but I don't honestly think it would reach that stage of including octonions. That would hopefully be a second stage of the work, like something to be incorporated after in a second layer, like something like that. Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know if anybody here has the answer to Jeff Colbrook's question around neutrinos being faster than the speed of light, and if it were
I
true,
do.
would that make neutrinos sub-Planck energies? Okay, go ahead, Jamie. What's that? What do you know about that?
My very vague memory of this is that they announced neutrinos go faster than the speed of light, and then they went, oops, actually, that might have been a miscalculation. I don't think they do anymore. So that was a brief moment in time where everybody was like, ooh, Einstein was wrong. Nope, Einstein was right. As far as I know, you don't quote me on this. I just remember seeing that. It was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
We'll leave it at that for now then. In regards to the question from IM, which has 3 postings around it, regarding my understanding is having to do with the ability to embrace the power of accessing the energy density that Jenny referred to, the quantum density in the vacuum of space. Accessing that power is just enormous and holds so much potential, and is actually going to be an inevitable step we humans take pretty soon, I have a sense here. And whether there must be a vibrational equilibrium of sorts that is achieved by those who are using that power. It's something that Nassim has spoken to in recent, I think even in the last, maybe right in the last Live with Nassim, so you might check that out as well. But the answer is yes. We have to actually mature our emotional bodies, get out of a mindset of domination, control, war, conflict, and to really fully embrace such technologies, and to be embraced by those who are already using such technologies, as Adam was talking about at the beginning of our session. It does require, coming into a kind of an equilibrium inside ourselves where we get ourselves centered, we get ourselves grounded, we get our emotional bodies in check, and we transcend a lot of the dynamics that are currently at play in our world. I think it's just going to go hand in hand, actually. And I think when, for example, like the arc crystal is such a technology, and that crystal will, when you wear it or drink the water from it, it will actually create the equilibrium state inside you. It brings coherent structure to the water in your body, and therefore all the cellular activity, that in itself is engendering that kind of equilibrium and coherence. And so it will go hand in hand. As Nassim says in Thrive 2, when talking about the resonator, it can power your home, it can power your car, and it can power your spaceship while making you healthy. And when you become healthy, you are released from a lot of the challenges, emotional pain, and all that drive a lot of the dynamics that we experience that are more conflicted. So when we are free and more healthy, and we have a coherent physical well-being, we can really embrace these technologies, I think, and will do so inevitably here.
Yeah, Nassim has spoken numerous times to how to get to super advanced technologies, you have to have the appropriate level of consciousness. And that is part of how he would explain why, if there are super advanced technologies being used by super advanced civilizations out there, we don't see any sign of them fighting each other, do we? No one's blowing up planets out there. It's because it doesn't work. That technology won't work if you're trying to use it to blow up a civilization, thankfully. So it's kind of nice to think that there's a built-in kind of safety mechanism in the universe, that if you're not in tune, you can't be that destructive on a gigantic scale, right? Like you can step on an ant, sure. But if you wanted to like take out the sun, you'd have some seriously hard time. You'd have to have a super advanced technology and it wouldn't probably work. Like you have to be in resonance with the universe for your technology to work.
Well, we had one more question and then another one just popped in, but we'll do a quick little popcorn on these last two questions and then close for the day. What is your perspective on 5G? I noticed that a 5G reference was briefly featured in an image in Quantum Evolution. Do you view the transition to 5G as a beneficial direction? I think that's it's a subject of much consideration and debate. Fundamentally, what it boils down to is when it comes to biological life, there are frequencies that are beneficial and frequencies that are detrimental. And there's a whole band of frequencies that 5G encompasses. 4G, 3G, 2G, they're all bandwidths of and energy levels of the transmission of those bandwidths that are using frequencies that some may be beneficial, some may be detrimental. The important thing is to actually become conscious of which ones are beneficial and which are detrimental, and start to apply that conscious awareness and that knowledge to basically tuning these technologies to be using only beneficial frequencies. My understanding about 5G is that's not the case. 5G has some potential other implications in regard to creating thermal effects and other kinds of effects in cellular biological systems. And so I think it's potentially has potential detriment. My understanding is that's the case. Now, whether or not that can be addressed and tuned to be otherwise is something that I'm very interested in exploring, and I'm considering how that might happen.
It's unfortunate that they have to put towers so close together that it only reaches effectively in a very short range, because you're going to spend all kinds of carbon emissions driving trucks all around the world to put poles up. Like, why are we putting up poles?
Everywhere, every 200 feet. It's so stupid. Antennas.
Tesla tried to tell everybody, hey, I can send you electricity. We don't need those poles and those wires. And then the powers of the bankers were like, well, we don't make money if we don't sell them wire and poles. So we're doing it again right now in 2021. We're putting poles up all over the world. Oh, I'm
being done for another reason. Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave that one there for now. And questions keep coming in, but I think, Ines, do you want to speak or anything, or I think we're getting pretty much ready to wrap up because we're approaching 2 hours here. Yeah.
I think we're pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, let's leave it at that for today. Thank you guys for your questions. You can bring them back next time, and we can go into them then. So we'll leave it at that for today. It feels like we've covered a lot of territory, very interesting topics you guys always bring to us and put us on the spot to speak to them with some understanding and clarity. So thank you everybody for being here, Jamie and Ines and Adam today. Thank you guys, as always.
Thanks for hosting, as always, Marshall. You've been holding this down and hosting all these Q&As and all these live with the Sims for years. So thanks for holding it down this whole time.
It's fun. I love it. It's great. Best conversation I know. So,
and I just wanted to say to everybody, we have some great courses coming up. Alan Green, the great Alan Green, has a course coming up that's going to be absolutely fascinating and engaging because it's interactive. And I just heard a rumor that William Brown wants to do a discount on his course. So keep your eyes out. William's course is super epic and dense, and he really wants the information to get out there. So he's talking about doing a pretty deep discount on his course coming up, and we'll announce that pretty soon.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. And there's lots of other great courses up there, as you know. So check them all out, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take good care in the meantime in our ever-evolving dynamics of planet Earth, as we figure ourselves out ever more. All right, be well. Catch you next time.
Everybody.
Lots of love.